Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second part of Figure It Out with Fatema. This is season 5, episode 30, and the second part of our supplier strategy. Because we spoke about that a couple of weeks ago with Spyros, and this week it's kind of a continuation. So thank you for everyone who kind of shared their questions. Um, so yeah, my name is Fatema El-Wakeel. This is episode 30, as I said. Um, and we're trying to put the questions up. So if you're joining us, please say hi from where you're joining. We're keeping an eye on the chat. Ask us questions. It's lovely to have you again, Spiros.
Thank you for having me. So, hi everyone. So,
Maybe a bit of introduction so
yeah,
that
it's
people,
not.
yes,
It's a good idea. It has been a few weeks.
yes,
So, hi everyone. I'm Spyros. I have spent the last almost 12 years with Unilever, primarily in analytics, uh, basically program management, delivery of complex solutions, a lot of contract negotiations, and have done a lot of insourcing and outsourcing.
yeah,
And that's why we do after the supplier uh, call a few weeks ago an insourcing
yes.
and outsourcing one.
Exactly. So yeah, I've worked with Spiros for quite some time. On a positive side, yes, I can definitely say he's one of the best people when it comes to supplier strategy, to be honest.
Thank you.
And yeah, we've worked together at Unilever quite a while. For me, I come from a data strategy and emerging tech background. So worked across Unilever, Jaguar Land Rover, worked across different industries. Um, but let's maybe discuss the insourcing versus outsourcing, because this is something that I think till now, a lot of people, when they speak to me, whether in conferences or in chats, or sometimes I get those questions, to be honest, even on LinkedIn, people reach out and like, oh, you know what, we have the suppliers, we have that supplier. Have you worked with those suppliers? And normally I'm like, okay, I can't really give confidential information. But they're like, what about our insourcing versus outsourcing strategy? And I felt this is really a hot topic. So let's think, because we were chatting about that before we
Yes,
joined.
we did.
What are the four, and you mentioned four main things that organization need to think about.
But before we go there, shall we
Okay.
just make it easy for everyone one step before?
Okay.
Insourcing means that you have work that you bring in people working directly for you to do. Potentially it's something new, or most likely something that you have either contractors or a
Mm.
supplier doing. Outsourcing is actually the exact opposite. You have work being done already in-house and you bring it out to either a contract work or more likely a big supplier.
Yes.
101. Okay.
Yes, so I love that. And yes, it's insourcing, it's inside. I think to make it very simple, insourcing inside the company, outsourcing is basically giving it to someone outside to do the job for you. So when we think insourcing versus outsourcing, and I've worked with different organizations and they had different strategies when it comes to in versus out. And I think you've summed it up really well in those four areas where organization look into it. So maybe you can let's
Sure.
discuss that first.
Yeah, a good idea. So let's be practical. Okay. There are a few criteria that we always have. First, it's cost.
Yeah.
Is it what is cheaper, what is more expensive, etc. Then you have the location. If you have a specific requirement on the location or potentially the work hours, etc., that might determine the location. Then you have the idea about if you want to retain certain knowledge in-house or if you are okay if it goes outside, particularly if it is something that it's more of a trade secret.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it's about how close it is to your core of the business. So, for example, if I am a winemaker in France, I might have the need to have some work related to data. So, let's say data center management. Great. Is it something that it would be my core expertise? Unlikely. Therefore, potentially it might be better off if I send it out rather than keep it in. And an important element in that is, let's say that you have a niche element that you need. Winemaker, again,
Yeah.
example. That data center management, uh, if you have a couple of people doing it, it's great. They
Mm-hmm.
might be amazing people and it might work very well for you. But you need to think about continuity of business. So, for example, is it something that those two people, they don't have a wider community in the company to improve their skills? So is it necessarily the best environment for them? Things like that you always need to consider.
Okay. So to sum it up is cost, location, and then what is the third one?
It's about what the intellectual
Intellectual.
property,
Yes. And
and
then
there and the fourth element is about your wider strategy.
your wider strategy. Love that. Okay. So cost, location, intellectual, and then wider strategy. So if we speak about cost, yes, when it comes to money, so it's Spyros. So that's the question. Insourcing versus outsourcing, which would be beneficial cost wise?
It depends.
It depends.
It
Good.
always depends.
That's always a good MBA answer. That's what they taught us in the MBA. It depends.
Uh, Generally, what will happen is that companies might shift from one to another as costs change. So, for example, if you have, let's say, five contractors working for you, let's say,
Mhm.
number in there, £1,000 a day, that's 5K just on a daily basis. If you insource that, including pension, including taxes, including everything, all the other overheads, most likely you will still make a significant saving, even if you have them in the UK. Now, on the contrast, if you have something that is already very cheap in-house, actually, if you outsource it, even if you do it in a lower cost location, it might be more expensive.
Love that.
So you need to start with where you actually are and what do you need to achieve.
And I think that is really important because the bit where I think cost and location, one and two, kind of come hand in hand. Because if you're insourcing in the UK, you can insource also in another country. There are a few other like hubs, tech hubs, or data hubs around the world at the moment. And if you can outsource, or whether, well, to be honest, whether insource it in one of your hubs if you're a global multinational, or outsource it, I think this is the bit where you don't need to play with location and cost. But with location, that comes another cost, which is the time.
Correct.
Time zones. And you know that I'm big on time zone. It's always like
You have always been.
yes. So when it comes to time zones, I feel like there is a pro and con. The pro is someone who, for example, India can hand over to the UK and UK can hand over to the US, which is brilliant. But does it really happen?
It's some companies are better at it. Microsoft, for example, if you have an issue, you would have an engineer, escalation manager working on it, and you can select if it is survey to follow the sun.
Mhm.
Basically, they do the handover and they're pretty good at it. A lot of companies are not as effective, but it depends a lot on how big you are and how experienced you are. But we need to be a bit practical on this. There are certain locations that you are more likely that you will get in that location 24/7 support if that's what you need
Mhm.
compared to others. So, for example, a location that is considered expensive, UK, US, Germany, France, etc.,
Mhm.
it might be much less likely that you will get a 24/7 setup. More likely you will get extended hours, but that's it. On the contrary, Brazil, India, Pakistan, potentially South Africa, a few European locations, but it depends heavily. You can get single location 24/7.
Yes.
So again, your scope matters.
The scope matters. And I think this is the bit you can't really look at. So within all those four categories we're speaking about, you can't isolate and say, I'm going to focus on one without the other because somehow they're all interlinked. So you think about them together. And here, I think Spyros and I, we're not giving answers. We're just showing you the art of the possible, things that you should be thinking about if you're looking at supplier strategy, insourcing versus outsourcing. So we spoke about location, we spoke about cost, we spoke about following the sun, which I love. And I don't know how realistic it
IP.
is. IP. So now the third bit, which is the intellectual bit, which is the IP. What do organizations need to think about when it comes to the IP, and how do they manage it with their insourcing versus outsourcing?
So we discussed a bit about it on our first call together, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to IP, contractual agreement can protect you, and that's usually not a problem. However, if it is a very niche skill, it might be that you don't want people that skill becoming more wider available.
Mm.
Let's say if you have found an amazing way to do pricing, okay,
Mm.
and you have people doing it for you in house, you might be able to find one of the big suppliers that has people that you can train to do it for you. Or actually, if you outsource, some of the times they will take your people for a couple of years under them
Mm.
and gradually shift to a lower cost. It's quite common practice, but you need to think if it is something that it's your key competitive advantage, you might still want to do it in-house, more arm length, rather than even a protected environment through IP, through contractual agreement.
I agree.
It depends.
And I think that's, yeah, it depends. And I think it's really important to think about what do you want to keep internally, and also the maturity level of the organization when it comes to data and emerging tech. So if you're quite mature, you might want to outsource, but there isn't really this level of skill set outside. And equally, if you are a bit behind, maybe outsourcing can help you upskill even your employees that are currently. And then there's the plan to say, okay, this is outsourcing and we'll move to insourcing in a few years or across the years. And that brings us to the fourth point, which is the strategy. So part of the data strategy is actually the supplier strategy.
And
And part of the
also people management.
and people management, yes. And the 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 supplier strategy can impact your data strategy because it's a two-way thing. Like, as much as you want to say, oh, this is what we're going to do and this makes sense, sometimes you can't find the skills in the market, or you can't find the right supplier. And it is quite challenging. It's not as easy as we say, okay, let's just go and sort it out. And with that, I think one of the important things when it comes to insourcing and outsourcing is the how the organization works. And I think we both worked in multinationals. And I've worked across a spectrum where from federated, which is an organization that has a hub and spoke, and hub actually dictates what's happening, or the suppliers the organization works with, and then the spoke, they take the suppliers, but they can create their own strategy in the spoke, versus organizations where it's really only centered, like Unilever is quite open about it. Unilever is very, it's HQ driven, so it's everything happens in the hub. There isn't, I don't think there is a right or wrong. It depends on the maturity of the organization, the skill set in the organizations. Jaguar Land Rover is hub and spoke, and again, the organization is very open. It's out in the news. We're not saying anything here, by the way, that's not out. So with that comes the complexity of, if you're in sourcing, can you actually upskill?
Well, that's the biggest challenge, right? Let's take fictional example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that you are a noodle maker.
Okay.
So, because we spoke about wine enough,
Yes.
uh, and you have two positions that they're, uh, let's say, JavaScript developers, okay,
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript. Great, you can insource, you can find some amazing people,
Mm-hmm.
okay. How do you have a career progression plan for those people? How do you upskill them within the company? And yes, you can do external to training, you can ask them to continue keeping current, all those can happen. But at the same time, they don't have like a center of excellence they
Mm-hmm.
can go to get advice, to help
Yes.
resolve the issue. And also, no one wants to remain, okay, let me rephrase that. Most people don't want to remain and do the same thing for 30 years.
Yes.
And in that case, for example, you need to think pragmatically, is the best scenario, is it the best, not only for you, but also for the people, right? You need to take under consideration because if the people don't see career progression,
Mm-hmm.
they don't see a future, they see that if something goes wrong, they are left to
Mm-hmm.
fend for themselves. The best people won't want to come and work there.
And I think that becomes the iteration that's actually a whole episode in
Yeah.
itself. How to keep data people in an organization. I know the market is yeah, there are some challenges in the market, but to be honest, the keeping the right skill set within an organization is very, very difficult because the good people are hard to find, hard to keep, and it's also difficult to plan their progress. So again, insourcing versus outsourcing, that is linked to your employee strategy and your maturity level. Because if an organization is not as mature, first of all, there is a challenge to insource. Not everyone would, at a high maturity level, would like to come because they also are caring about their career. You need to mature this data and emerging tech environment really, really well so that it becomes interesting and exciting for them to come. And that's even more challenging because you're changing your data strategy, you're changing your data culture. So finding the right people and keeping them. There are people who would like to stay in the career, but those are not also common. So that's another challenge. If someone wants to be an SME, subject matter expert, they want to stay in that role for 30, 40 years, brilliant. But you need to create this for them as well. So it's a challenge keeping the good people, and the challenge whether they are want career progression or the people who are subject matter experts who again they want their own career progression in their own way. Um, but yeah, I think it is very different when you have a federated model like a hub and spoke versus a centralized model. Uh, Again, the challenges are different. The data culture is different. The career progression is very, very challenging. I guess if you are a hub and spoke, you can move people around. It opens up because people can move from finance center of excellence to purchasing center of excellence to engineering center of excellence. And then all of a sudden, you keep the talent within the organization. While if you have a centralized, where are they going? The only way out is actually leaving the organization and growing somewhere else, unless you start to create those kind of rotation and jobs for them. But again, as I said, it's a whole. I can speak about that for hours. So let's get back to our supplier strategy.
uh, we also need to be pragmatic, okay? History has shown that generally there is a bit of a cyclicality. So companies might insource, then after a few years outsource, after a few years back insourcing, particularly for bigger companies. It depends a lot on the where they are in the cycle in terms of growth or maintain.
Mhm.
For example, if a company decides to make a multi-year big investment in data, they might actually do a lot of insourcing of certain elements. At the same time, if they have delivered what they needed and they are going to a bit more of maintain phase.
Hmm.
It might make sense to outsource in order to reduce the cost. Depends on the scenario. The other element that we need to discuss, and like with everything, there is a hybrid approach.
Yes.
You basically blend, right? You might insource certain skills and you might outsource certain others, and they might have to work in unison in order to
Hmm.
make the whole equation balance out.
Yes. I think that is really, I think it's the best. I think especially if it's a hub and spoke, if you have a center of excellence, but then you have spokes around the business, you might actually start saying, well, in the engineering, we might outsource that because this skill set is, we don't have it. We need to build it in, but we will outsource it for the moment, work hand in hand. And then it's actually an open, I think it's an open discussion with the supplier as well, being very transparent and saying, we're insourcing that. So you're here for those couple of years. This is the plan. Those are the targets that you need to hit to be for us to be able to insource it. But yeah, hybrid, I think hybrid is whether it's even in the centralized, it's the same. You can have hybrid, you can insource some stuff and outsource other. Um, and I think even if in a tech organization, like I've seen that especially with HP when I was there during the cloud implement. There are things that are done differently, again linked to the IP.
Yeah,
So, so those four things that we've chatted about, they are really hand in hand because again, if you're insourcing parts of it and outsourcing the other, the strategy might be impacted by your IP because you don't want to give your not only your tech, I guess, out, but sometimes what the plan is over the next few years.
correct. And that brings us back to what we said about it has to be a partnership. Yes, contracts necessary, but it's more about partnership. And look, none of the big companies would risk leaking any of the information because it
Yes.
will damage the reputation massively. And plus, they are actually most of the people are good people, right? They don't,
People are genuinely good.
yeah, they don't like to do monkey business. Uh, but you need to think where you are, what you need, how much you can pay, and you have to relook at it periodically to see if it is the right approach. And by the way, it might be the case that you have, let's say, 5 engineers.
Mm-hmm.
They are great, but you know that your engineering team is small. So you might still have two people body shopping in a way from one of your suppliers, working with them in order to enhance those skills.
Those
And there is also another practical element of continuity, if you think about it.
mm-hmm.
People inevitably leave organizations, leave their roles. They might move internally or externally, they might retire. Okay. And when you work with a supplier, it is their responsibility to find someone to backfill, get all the knowledge transfer, and the responsibility lies with that supplier. If the role is internal, that responsibility by definition lies with you. If it is a critical role, what you might end up doing is you're trying to find someone new. If you cannot, you might do contract for a bit of time and then try to find a permanent. But
Mm-hmm.
too many handovers, generally you go Chinese whispers setup that we did
Yes.
that sketch a few years ago.
Yes. So the Chinese whispers is quite, the more attrition you have, the more challenging it is with insourcing. Um, yes, it becomes very, very challenging. And I think with the data skills, especially, I know that some organizations, the attrition when it comes to data is monitored. Like how many of the data, especially if you're upskilling, they have an eye on how many people have left and how many people are joining, and then the attrition rate is quite, yeah, I remember that I once left and someone told me, yeah, I'll see that in the attrition next month. And I was like, okay, I'm a number then, but fine. um, but yeah, I think it is carefully monitored. And especially when you have, I think one of the things we definitely need to speak about employees and the
Yeah.
skill set, because how can you maintain your top performance when it comes to data? It is really a challenge.
Or any other area for that matter, right?
Yeah, but I think with the data skill set, it's very, very difficult because there aren't, the market is very, yeah, the market moves very fast. But yeah, again, all the skill set is important. I agree. But we speak about data, so
Yeah,
the
yeah.
rest is not my problem. Anyway, so let's wrap it up. I think you've added a fifth element now.
Well, sort of. I tried to sneak it in.
Yeah.
But before we wrap it up,
Mm.
for the Get community, we need to
Yes.
remind you, well, technically speaking, we're just announcing now, therefore we are not reminding you, that we will be doing a face-to-face roundtable now in May. Uh, you will see in the WhatsApp group uh, a poll on the dates, and we will have some food, some
Yes.
dinner after the round table, so a good opportunity to catch up. And for anyone who hasn't joined the WhatsApp group, you can find the Get community on LinkedIn, and we can also add you to the WhatsApp group. We need to make sure that we keep the community thriving as is.
Yes. Let's make sure that happens. We'll let's post, so let's do something. We'll in the after the event, we will post it in the messages in the chat so that you have access to the Get community. But maybe we need to explain what is the Get community, because I think some people so the Get community is an idea that we had, and I think it's something that we found challenging for us as people who are at a mid level of their career and leadership level. And I think it still goes whether if you want to progress with your career, it is a bit challenging. um, we want to support people, and part of it is offering that support, is trying to create the workshops, the dinners, the networking, as leaders from the industry. So we work in the industry. Also, I'm linked to the academia, and I think Spyros, you as well is linked. You're linked to academia as well. But we're trying to get people to really chat about the hot topic, things like we're chatting about today: data, data strategy, supplier strategy, your employee strategy. So we're having all those discussions.
Or supply chain and sales a few weeks
Oh
ago.
yes, we had supply chain and sales as well a few weeks ago. So yes, it's a community, and I want with that I would like to thank the University of Cambridge, and because they really supported this together with Alia. They gave me great support with the setup. Well, thanks Spiros, Abdelhamid, and Joshua, because they also are helping. You know, we together, the four of us are really partnering to get this thriving and launch this properly. So feel free to reach out to us, and we're gonna put definitely the comments in and wait for the roundtables.
And from my
With that,
side, I wanted to thank you, okay, for having me for a second time. Of course, the Get community and all our network who are watching this live or later on replay. And frankly, it has been a pleasure, like always.
yes, and it's not the last time. We need to kind of continue
Yes.
that. We have a plan now. So if you have any questions for us, please do put them in the comments. And we're definitely gonna we're happy to put more sessions like that. It has definitely been a pleasure. Like really enjoyed it as always for us.
And shout out to Tonista, who gave some amazing ideas about future sessions, if you remember.
Thanks to Nishta. And yeah, please give us ideas about future sessions, the things that you want us to speak about, chat about. Um, and if you're watching this on replay, thank you. If you're watching it live, again, thank you. And put your comments through. And with that, thank you again, Spiros, and hopefully we'll have another session soon.
Thank you, Fatema, and thank you everyone who is watching this.
Yes, thank you all for watching, and speak to you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.